October 7th, 1777. A hillside above the Hudson River called Bemis Heights. A general has just been relieved of his command. His commanding officer, sick of his temper and his ego, has stripped him of every soldier under him and ordered him to stay in camp. And right now, at the exact moment his army needs him most, that general is doing the one thing nobody expected. He's disobeying a direct order. He gallops onto the battlefield without permission, without a command, without so much as a staff officer at his side, and he starts giving orders to troops that are not his to command. Soldiers who've watched this man fight before fall in behind him anyway. He leads a charge straight into a fortified German position called the Bremen Redoubt, riding through musket fire that's killing men on every side of him, and he personally leads the assault that breaks the British line.
A German soldier trying to defend the last redoubt standing between the Americans and total victory puts a musket ball through this general's left leg. His horse collapses on top of him, crushing the same leg further. He is dragged out from underneath it, bleeding, screaming in pain. And by the time the sun goes down, the Americans have won the battle that will decide the entire Revolutionary War. 10 days later, the British Army surrenders. It is the first time in history that a British army has ever laid down its arms. It convinces France to join the war on the American side, and that alliance is what will ultimately win American independence. Here's the twist. The general who did more than any other man on that field to make this victory happen has his name scrubbed off almost every monument built to celebrate it. Because that general's name is Benedict Arnold.
Say the name Benedict Arnold to almost anyone in America today, and you get one word back: traitor. It's practically a synonym. If you want to call someone a sellout, you call them a Benedict Arnold. What most people don't know is that for the first 4 years of the Revolutionary War, Benedict Arnold was arguably the single most dangerous field commander America had. Not the most famous, not the most beloved, the most dangerous. The general the British were most afraid to face. It started early. In May of 1775, weeks after the first shots of the war, Arnold and Ethan Allen led the surprise capture of Fort Ticonderoga, the same fort whose cannons Henry Knox would later drag to Boston. Later that year, Arnold led a brutal overland expedition through the Maine wilderness to attack Quebec, a march so punishing that his men were reduced to eating shoe leather and dogs to survive.
The assault on Quebec failed, and a musket ball tore through his left leg during the attack. The first time that leg would be wounded in this war, though not the last. In 1776, with the British building a fleet to control Lake Champlain, Arnold personally oversaw the construction of a scrappy American flotilla and threw it directly at the Royal Navy at the Battle of Valcour Island. He lost the battle. He lost almost every ship, but he delayed the British advance long enough that the invasion that year stalled out before winter. And historians still argue that this single delay, this defeat that looked like nothing at the time, may have bought the Continental Army the extra year it needed to survive. By 1777, Arnold had been wounded fighting for a cause he clearly believed in, had personally financed some of his own early campaigns out of pocket, and had built a reputation among the men who served under him as a commander who led from the front instead of the rear.
In February of 1777, Congress promoted 5 men to Major General. Benedict Arnold, senior to all of them, senior in service and in battlefield record, was not one of the 5. It wasn't really about merit. Congress at the time was dividing military promotions by state quotas, trying to keep the Army's leadership balanced across the colonies. And Connecticut, Arnold's state, had already gotten its share. Arnold took it as a personal insult anyway, and he wasn't entirely wrong to be furious. Men junior to him with thinner records were suddenly outranking him.
George Washington, who valued Arnold as much as any field commander he had, personally intervened and got Congress to restore his seniority a few months later. It should have settled things. It didn't. It was the first crack in a relationship between Benedict Arnold and the men who governed the war effort, a relationship that would only get worse and that would eventually matter far more than anyone in 1777 could have guessed. But in the summer of 1777, none of that mattered yet, because a British army was marching south out of Canada, and it was about to walk straight into Benedict Arnold's path.
British General John Burgoyne had a plan that looked brilliant on a map. Split the rebellious colonies in half by driving an army down from Canada through the Hudson River Valley, link up with British forces coming up from New York City, and cut off New England, the heart of the rebellion, from everywhere else. By early August, Burgoyne had already captured Fort Ticonderoga without a fight, humiliating the American garrison there, and was pushing south with roughly 7,000 men. On paper, it looked unstoppable. In practice, Burgoyne's army was dragging an enormous baggage train through dense American wilderness, stretching his supply lines thinner with every mile, and running low on the local support he'd been counting on. A detachment of his force had already been chewed up trying to raid supplies at the Battle of Bennington. Still, by mid-September, Burgoyne's exhausted, hungry army had reached the outskirts of a small village called Saratoga on the western bank of the Hudson. Waiting for him, dug into the high ground at a place called Bemis Heights, was an American army of roughly 8,000 men under General Horatio Gates. And serving directly under Gates, itching for a fight, was Benedict Arnold. The two armies collided on September 19, 1777, in the fields around a homestead called Freeman's Farm. Arnold argued for an aggressive forward defense, meet Burgoyne's column before it could reach the American lines, rather than sit back and wait. Gates, cautious by nature and wary of risking his position, preferred to hold the high ground and let the British come to him. Arnold pushed hard enough that Gates gave in, at least partially, and sent troops forward under Arnold's direction. The fighting at Freeman's Farm was brutal and confused, swinging back and forth across the same ground for hours. By the end of the day, technically, Burgoyne held the field, but he paid for it in blood. British and German casualties were more than double the American losses, and Burgoyne's battered force had gained almost no ground toward Albany. Here's where it gets uglier. When Gates wrote his official report to Congress about the battle, he barely mentioned Benedict Arnold at all. The two men, who had never particularly liked each other, exploded into a screaming argument in front of other officers. Gates responded by stripping Arnold of his field command entirely and ordering him to stay in camp for the rest of the campaign. Arnold considered leaving the army altogether. Other officers talked him out of it. He stayed, furious, humiliated, and without a single soldier left to command. For nearly 3 weeks, the two armies sat facing each other, waiting. Burgoyne was hoping for reinforcements from New York that would never come. Gates was content to starve him out. On October 7th, Burgoyne finally sent a reconnaissance force forward, probing for a weakness in the American position. Gates responded by ordering an attack, and back in camp, with no command and no orders to do anything at all, Benedict Arnold heard the sound of battle starting without him. He couldn't stand it. He mounted his horse and rode straight for the fighting. What happened next has been picked apart by historians for 2.5 centuries, because nobody can say for certain whether Arnold was acting entirely alone or under some kind of unofficial understanding. What the record does show is that Gates, realizing Arnold had ridden onto the field without permission, sent an aide after him with orders to return to camp immediately. And that aide never caught up with him in time. Arnold threw himself into the thick of the fighting, riding along the American lines, rallying troops, and led an assault against a fortified position called the Bremen Redoubt, defended by around 200 German soldiers. One American who watched him that day would later say Arnold fought like the genius of war itself. The Americans overran the redoubt,
It was the position anchoring the entire British flank, and once it fell, Burgoyne's whole line became impossible to hold. In the final moments of the fighting, a German soldier's musket ball tore through Arnold's left leg, the same leg wounded outside Quebec 2 years earlier, and his horse was shot and collapsed on top of him, crushing the leg beneath it. Surgeons wanted to amputate.
Arnold refused, reportedly saying he'd rather die than live as a cripple. It would take him 5 months in a hospital bed, and the leg would heal 2 inches shorter than the other one for the rest of his life. He would never lead troops into a full-scale battle again.
3 days later, Burgoyne tried to retreat north. The weather turned against him, the roads turned to mud, and Gates's army, now more than 3 times the size of what remained of Burgoyne's force, surrounded him completely. On October 17th, 1777, General John Burgoyne formally surrendered his entire army to the Americans. It was the first time in history a British army had surrendered in the field, and the shockwave reached Europe within weeks. France, which had been quietly funneling supplies and gunpowder to the Americans for 2 years without officially picking a side, finally agreed to a formal military alliance. Spain would follow. What had looked only a year earlier like a doomed colonial uprising was now a war with international backing, resources, and eventually a navy that would help trap Cornwallis at Yorktown 4 years later.
Horatio Gates got the credit. Congress struck a medal in his honor. Newspapers across the colonies called him the hero of Saratoga. And while Gates sat comfortably at headquarters accepting the praise, Benedict Arnold lay in a hospital bed in Albany, his leg packed in a wooden splint, unable even to hold a pen to write a letter, listening to messengers describe the celebrations happening in his name, a name Gates's own official report had barely bothered to include. Arnold's seniority and rank were eventually restored by Congress, in what was clearly meant as recognition for his wound and his service. Arnold didn't read it that way.
He read it as pity, an apology nobody had the courage to actually say out loud, and it confirmed something that had been growing in him for 2 years, that no matter what he did for this country, on this battlefield or any other, it would never be enough to matter to the men who ran it.
Today, if you visit Saratoga National Historical Park, you'll find a strange little monument shaped like a boot. It doesn't have a name on it. The inscription calls the man it honors the most brilliant soldier of the Continental Army, wounded on that exact spot, winning the decisive battle of the Revolution. A few hundred yards away stands the Saratoga Monument, with 4 carved niches for the 4 generals most responsible for the victory. 3 of them hold statues: Gates, Schuyler, Morgan. The 4th niche has always been empty. It was built for Benedict Arnold, and it has stayed empty on purpose for over a century, because the men who built that monument couldn't bring themselves to erase him completely, and couldn't bring themselves to honor him by name either. That's the strange, uncomfortable truth sitting underneath one of America's most famous stories.
The same fury, the same wounded pride, the same conviction that he deserved more credit than anyone was willing to give him. That's the exact same fire that made Benedict Arnold charge an enemy redoubt without orders and break the back of a British army. 3 years later, that same fire would lead him to a very different decision, one that turned his name into the most hated word in American history. We're not telling that story today. Today, we're telling the one they tried to leave off the monument, the one where for a few hours on a hillside above the Hudson River, Benedict Arnold was the best soldier in the American Revolution. If this story surprised you, hit subscribe. And let me know in the comments if you want the second half of this story, the fall, the betrayal, and how the hero of Saratoga became the most infamous name in American history. If you learned something today, smash that like button so more people find this channel. Until next time.